Hi, everybody. Hi, JRV TV fans. How are y'all doing today? Can you believe this painting is so pretty and so easy? This is what we're calling Silver Birch Forest in Autumn. And we are going to be using JRV Stencils and a decoupage sheet to create this painting. I'm Terry with Morning Dewdrops by Terry Stevens, and we are the Art of Doing show, home decor, and more. Thank you for being here. Send likes and comments. Share if you'd like. Have any questions, you can put them in the comments. And even though I might not be able to get to them during the show, I will certainly do so afterwards. People ask me all the time, where do I get my inspiration? I have been dying. I've even dreamed about it, and I'm not kidding, of painting on this decoupage sheet that we'll take a closer look of in a minute. And when these silver birch tree stencil came out, I knew what I was going to do. I was first inspired by Gustav Klimt. So we might as well be in Vienna, Austria. He has a masterpiece that I fell in love with. And even though our painting looks nothing like his, it's even at a different view. There are so many things that can inspire you, and then you can take that further and look for references. You can go on Pinterest, you can look at nature, and if you would like to know more about Gustav Klimt, he's at gustav-klimt.com, and there's something called Upsplash. Upsplash.com. You can join. You can look at people's photos, and they're copyright free, and you give credit to the person who took the photography. So be sure and watch to the end of the show when we also show you what we did with the remaining decoupage sheet that we did not include in our painting. So let's go into another reason why I'm inspired by, I'll put it here, Gustav Klimt, is because even though he was part of the establishment, he believed in artistic freedom and expression. And you may know him from the Art Nouveau period, but with his gold leafing, but that was not accepted at the time. And he was a risk taker, and that's what we do every day with individual artistic freedom, and take that risk and jump right in. And this is so easy to do. You are going to be amazed at how easy this does, because the decoupage sheet, the illustrated decoupage sheet, acts as an underpainting, which takes hours and hours and hours to create if you didn't have it. So, and you can go full coverage. You can do lighter foliage. There are so many options. And Gustav Klimt, he's most happy when he's painting, and he wears this large blue monk's smock, and he uses it as his art smock. And he's a little out there, but aren't all of us creative? So let's take a look at our inspiration and some of the shots that we will use as a reference. This is Gustav Klimt with his cat, and this is the inspiration, his Birch Forest I 1902 masterpiece. I also went on Upsplash and picked these photos for a reference. I love the colors of the bright golden and burnt orange colors,
and the depiction of the close-up of the birches. Here's our painting. We've named her Silver Birch Forest in Autumn.
I think it's so pretty. I'm always surprised at myself, but it's these products that you can do all these things with it that surprise you. This is the Silver Birch stencil that we'll be using, and it's part of JRV, and it was designed by Vintage Retail Therapy by Mayor. And it does come with some branches. It comes with 2 branches, and then the decoupage sheet, the stencil of the birch trees, silver birch trees. There's a difference. And this is our paper. This is JRV. It is entitled In the Forest. In French, that's Dans la Foret. And that's the name of the stencil. The decoupage sheet. So you can see these are probably oak trees, and I put in some birch trees. And you'll also notice that I chose to use this portion of the decoupage sheet, and so I had some remaining. Okay, those are 2 main things. I put this on a 16 by 20. It's just what I happen to have. MDF board. In fact, this board had some kind of material over it. It was a plaid, and I was going to take that off and just use the board, but I didn't feel like taking out the staple, so I just left it and painted over the fabric. So we're going to go over how we prep, and it's very important to prep. It makes your life so much easier for the life of your art and so forth. All right, so some of the other things that we are using is we are using sea sponges. You dampen them, but make sure you dampen them before you paint with them. We're using stencil brushes, 1 little small art brush, and a palette knife, but you could use an old gift card or even a craft stick. We're going to need some masking tape or painter's tape. And you also are going to need a few art mediums. When people talk about art mediums, it's a medium or substance that you would use to enhance any of your paint for certain effects or to make your life easier when you're painting, to be honest. Okay, so we are using a white gesso, which is like a primer on a canvas or on a board. You can buy the inexpensive kind. And we are using a glazing medium, which gives a little open time for your paint, allowing them not to dry as quickly. Of course, we'll be using a raised stencil medium, and you can find all of these at your craft store. I was just making sure I included all of the mediums we're using. So there's 4. There's the glazing, your decoupage medium to apply the decoupage sheet to your substrate, and the white gesso. You can use white paint. I simply just use the white gesso, and then you have a raised stencil medium, and that's just a textured medium that allows stencils to be 3D and be raised. And it is like a paste. I think some of them called paste. Okay, so what colors are we going to need for our paint? Now, I've got them here. But we have, this is the white gesso or white paint, even though you can't see it. And this is black. This is a copper metallic that is certainly optional. It's used sparingly, and so is the black. So we have dark green or a deep green, a medium green, here like an olive green, a bright yellow, a dark brown, and a bright orange. That's our paint palette. Okay, now, you don't have to do this, but this is a ceramic egg holder, deviled eggs. And I use it for when I use my pigment powders or my glazing. And that's my go-to for that. So for those that are interested. As far as your MBF board, you're welcome to get those at art supply stores and everything, but also be on the lookout for art that is off season. For example, like at Target or other craft stores, they might have a clearance on spring because they're well into autumn. And you can get those at 75-80% savings. This was a painting prior to this, the plaid fabric, which is nothing wrong with that. I just didn't need it for that. Was retailed for $39, and I think I paid $7 or $8 for this board. And so there you go. So let's get started. And on our first segment, we're going to be looking at how we prepped our board, which will already be prepped. So what you want to do is you take your board or your canvas. If you're going to use decoupage paper, which we are here, I highly recommend the MDF board. But you could do this on a piece of wood. You could do it on a cutting board. You could take some of these techniques and use them on the side or the front part panels of furniture. There's so many things, but pick a hard surface for the decoupage paper because we're going to be painting on top of it. Okay, and so I actually primed my board with 2 coats of the white gesso, and I let it dry. And then I took my decoupage medium, that what you're using to apply it to your surface. I applied 2 coats and let each one of those dry. And I did it in opposite directions. My first coat would have gone this way, and my second coat would have gone this way. And then I let it completely dry. And that is where this next segment starts. And it will go over why we want to do that if we're using the iron-on method of decoupaging.
This is our 16 by 20 MDF board, and as mentioned earlier, the decoupage paper is 20 by 30. We're allowing for wrapping on the edges as well. Remember, we've primed our board with gesso, and we've already applied 2 coats in opposite directions of our decoupage medium, letting each of those coats dry in between. We go in opposite directions with the separate coats to get full coverage every area of our board that we're going to decoupage on top of. Now we are applying our decoupage sheet to our board using the iron-on method. Dry iron, medium heat, parchment paper to protect our iron and paper. We're starting at the top center of our paper and moving outward from the center on each side. And as we go down, we'll start in the center first and then move out to the sides, doing section by section. We also want to remember that we need to do our sides as well. We let this cool and apply a coat of the decoupage medium over our decoupage sheet and allow that to completely dry. This protects or gives extra protection from moisture, but also allows for easier application of our paints. You will see bubbles, but once it has dried and we take it and iron over that piece the same way we did before with our parchment paper, medium heat, dry iron, you will see that all of these bubbles are gone. It is completely smooth and one with the board, and we are now ready to paint our piece. Painting and stenciling. In order for you to better see what I'm doing, I've already painted and stenciled the large trees in the foreground. I masked them off with painter's tape and tapered their trunks near the top. These larger trees have pretty much covered up the back end of our sheet we didn't need. On the right, we have 5 more trees. Of these, I started with existing tree trunks on the decoupage sheet and used painter's tape to mask off each one, tapering near the top. We first paint the tree trunks brown with enough paint to cover our background, and it gives the trees a little texture. Then we need to wait for the paint to dry before we start with our stencil, and this time we'll be using our raised stencil medium. And remember, we have 1 tree on each side of our board that we will do the same thing to. You may need to put 2 coats of the brown paint on your tree trunks to cover up the background underneath. And of course, our stencil of our trees are spaced out differently than they are on our painting, so they might not match up, but you will get an exact fit from any choice you need on your stencil. Sometimes I was able to apply the raised stencil medium on 2 trees before repositioning the stencil again, and depending on how tall we made our trees, you may need to extend the raised stencil with a more narrow trunk near the top. The raised stencil medium does not need to be dry before you remove the stencil. Here I'm using a palette knife to apply the raised stencil medium, but you can also use an old gift card or color shaper or even a craft stick. We removed our stencil, and now we are removing the painter's tape that we no longer need. As you can see, I was able to do 2 before replacing or repositioning the stencil again.
Okay, so if we take a closer look at what we started with, this is basically the portion that we have on our painting. And I took these 3 tree trunks and decided to make them into the foreground and brought them all the way down to the end of the board or the decoupage sheet, because I had a sheet backside that wouldn't look pretty good there. So that's why we did that. But we also did it to have larger trees in the foreground, and in those you could add those stencil branches that come with the birch stencil, but I chose not to. So, and each one of these other trees, that's where I taped to get my trunks, and I brought them up. And as I brought them up, I tapered the trunk and painted it brown, and then applied the raised stencil medium. So with that, we're going to continue with the raised stenciled medium, and that is our next segment. I think that's segment 2. I'm not sure. I apologize. I think we just finished. No, we did not. Okay.
Here we are applying the raised stencil medium with the back of the palette knife. And we can take off the stencil and remove the tape that we no longer need and reveal what we've done. If you have excess medium on your stencil, you can scrape that with the side of your palette knife so you don't waste any product, and you can put that back and reuse it for your next tree. I also randomly applied, depending on where the tree was located and the last tree I put the raised stencil on, so I would give the tree next to it time to dry before I lay down the stencil that might go on top of it. This is a really skinny tree, and I'm only going to go up a portion of the way, and this is an example of where it gets so narrow. I would take the smallest of the trees on the stencil and complete that part of the trunk that's being tapered toward its height. And here is our final tree on our painting. Remember, we have one on each side as mentioned before, and we would do those the same way. And as you remove that tape, you can also save it and reuse it. I do that all the time. Look at the dimension that we got from our birch tree stencil when we used a raised medium. It's smooth. Notice at the bottom of the trunks I went ahead and painted those in the brown color. Now for our silver birch foliage. This birch tree forest is our inspiration from Klimt. We'll be using our sea sponge. Be sure you have it damp before you get started. And we have a medium green, a deep green, an orange, and a bright yellow. And you can offload if you like. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. In the darker areas I'm trying to cover, I went straight on with the color. You cannot get this wrong, and it is to your taste as to what you would like to add. And we're mainly going golden here because those are the colors that I was drawn to when I think of a silver birch. And when we talk about Klimt, he was looking at the forest maybe closer up and at more of eye level. This to me reminds me as if we were on an incline and the sheep are going down into the meadow, because we can see so much of the trees, even the ones that we have on the left that are close up than the others. We're not looking as if those are right on top of us. We also had as an inspiration this picture, which is a golden orange, so we are adding that orange. This is beautiful. If you were doing a fall on another tree, you could use a lot of this, and even a deep red. Here I am sponging on the green. This is the inspiration or reference that I was also thinking of as we go into the forest, but isn't this gorgeous? Look at the golden colors of that reference. So here we are. We've done our foliage in our trees. I also added some of the deep green paint with the paintbrush in the darker areas around the trees, in between the trees and around the area of the sheep, kind of where the dark area already was in our illustration.
Amazing. If you just took the birch trees with the raised stencil on that decoupage sheet and left it like a black and white illustrative, I could have stopped there. And when I first started using the damp sea sponge with the yellow color more sparsely, you could certainly do that and that be your only color. And you do not have to have as much foliage as I have here. But the main thing you want is to make sure, and we'll go over that later, keep some of your white areas. That's the importance of the decoupage paper behind it, as if we ourselves had also painted that portion. You can see the birch trees coming through some of the foliage. You can see, so take advantage of the white places that are already on your decoupage sheet so that you don't have to recreate that part. And it's certainly okay to leave some of your foliage in the black and white illustration on our decoupage sheet. And isn't it easy with the, just make sure your your sea sponge is damp, and you just wash them and clean it out. I'm using a water-based paint, so there's no problem there. All right, so now we're going to use some of our glazing, and we'll be using some of that on the grassy area where our sheep are grazing.
Let's do our glazing on the bottom of our painting. We'll be using a glazing medium with the deep green, medium green, and yellow. Notice I'm using just a small artist brush and I'm dabbing in those areas. When I'm using a glaze, I'm only putting the tip of the paintbrush into the glaze, and most what's on my paintbrush is paint. And notice how I'm holding my paintbrush. I want this very loose. I'm just really getting it on there, and we will work with it more later. A glaze will give you a transparency or a translucency in which we can add even more depth because we have so much texture in our trees and foliage already. So I'm just dabbing it around in the areas that I like. Be sure and leave some white areas, especially those areas that are already white for us. We'll talk about lighting and highlights later. Here I'm using the medium green, and I will be doing the same thing that I did with the darker green, and I'm just dabbing it in areas and going across the board, hitting those areas that I'd already used, going over some of the same area and adding a little bit outside of those areas. The other glaze we'll be using is the yellow, and once we have completed with our medium green, you will see a big difference because the yellow is so bright and will even lighten the darker green. When you think of glazing medium, you could use water, but this allows for a more open, your paint to be more open, and that simply means it will not dry as fast with using a glaze, so that you are able to manipulate the paint because it'll be wet longer. We're using the yellow, just a tip of the glaze in the paintbrush, and now we are dabbing the yellow, holding our brush back so we will be loose, and we can also dab with our finger, and I'm mingling those colors together. I'm not overworking the glaze. I'm letting it work and let those colors mingle. I'm getting some more of the yellow, and we're kind of bringing down that golden color, and we want to accentuate the fact that the area between these trees is dark and lush, and the sheep are grazing, of course. I'm taking some of the glaze at the bottom of the tree trunks. I'm also taking it, or will be taking it, into the bottom of our canvas, because that's an extension of our painting. And you can see here I'm using the yellow a little bit more intense, and it's mingling with the other glazing that is already there, giving us dimension, not with just the three colors we're using, but a variety of those shades.
Okay, so that was our glazing, and we'll take a look. All right, now most of the highlights were from the lighting that was already a clear area on our decoupage sheet, and I did take the sea sponge. I dabbed it in a little I dabbed it in a little bit of the white gesso, offloaded for sure, and a little bit of the white area where I had gotten really intense or deep with the foliage. I added a little bit of highlights with the gesso. I also brought it down a little bit sparingly into the bottom and even in between the trees. I also like to put a little bit on there, and then I'll smear it with my finger. Great effect. Great effect. We also talked about how we're on a wrapped board or canvas. So we actually have a tree we did the same thing to as we did one on the front, and this is the side with the additional little sheep. So, and then on the side where we went more in the foreground, I went ahead and took that tree all the way up from the bottom so that it would look like this if someone was looking from the side, and they could also look like this if they were looking from the side. We took into consideration, now this is a 16 by 20. So my board is all of the decoupage paper going that width. But if this had been shorter, I would have actually I would have mitered my corners, and I would have wrapped if I'd had more decoupage paper like I did on the sides, and that would have been the image that you would continue. But we didn't have that here. So if you can see, all I did, I took a little bit of, very sparingly, black paint, and I put it on the sponge, damp of course, and offloaded. I added a little bit of black, very little. You can't even really see it. However, we're working with a black and white illustrated decoupage sheet, so we want a little bit of that color to follow through to match our other part of the painting. And we did the foliage the same way, the yellow and the orange and the green. Now the bottom looks more like the grass. I started with a little bit of the black, and I just used the sponges and dabbed them with the same colors that we put in the grass. And now that I think about it, I could have, I probably glazed, just used the glazing medium, and while I was doing that, went on down the front. As I was doing that, I went ahead and did that. It doesn't have to match perfectly. You can see that it doesn't match perfectly, but you can't tell from one beginning to one end where that decoupage paper ended. And our surprise, because we did have some decoupage paper left over, here's a little sheet we can still use. So be sure and save your pieces, because you could put this in another little something. But I took another portion that was left over, and it was these big tree trunks. And I just took a sample board, plywood or whatever, and kept their tree trunks natural and added all the colors that we used in our painting. Same way, I added a little bit of a burnt red, because I'm thinking these are kind of like oaks, and they would have that color in there. And you could probably see on my glazing palette that I didn't use these deeper red oranges in our painting today, but I did in this one. And I think I put more of that color down below to show it more. So now we've got another cute little painting. There's so much you can do, and there's so many ideas, and I just get excited for everything. You can take optionally some of that gold metallic and with a sponge and go in and lightly, it will give it a little glistening. You cannot see it until it's up close, or a certain way the light may hit it. So that is our show today. We have transformed and worked with these stencils and these decoupage papers, and easy painting techniques. And I think the prettiest are the sheep. And don't they stand out? So I just feel like they are grazing in Vienna, Austria, headed down the meadow into our silver birch forest in autumn. I think Gustav Klimt would like it. Until next time, let me know if you need anything. I had fun today, and we'll see you next time. Tuesdays, the first Tuesday of every month. So I'll see you in November at noon Central Standard Time, first Tuesday in November. Until then, God bless. Thank you. Bye.